and welcome again to another edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I am your host, Rabbi Richard Address, the Director of Jewish Sacred Aging, and we welcome you to today's edition of the podcast. And again, a reminder that if you'd like to contact me about ideas for the program, feel free to email me at Rabbi Address at jewishsacredaging.com. And it is with a great deal of pleasure that we welcome a colleague and friend, Rabbi Barry Block, author and editor of this very, where we go, the Social Justice Torah Commentary. The Social Justice Torah Commentary, edited by Rabbi Barry Block, and CCAR, published by the Central Conference of American Rabbis Press, available at your local bookstore and obviously at the great God, Amazon. Barry, welcome. Baruch haba. Nice to see you again.
It's nice to be with you.
So my colleagues out there who may be watching this or listening to this, or lay people involved with social justice committees, etc., in their particular congregation or organization, this is one that you have to go out and click on and get, because it's a very, big, a good teaching technique, a teaching tool for not only adults, but also, let me suggest, for confirmation classes, etc., who will be exposed to things that they perhaps never were exposed to before. This is a very, interesting book. It's coming out now. When the social justice agendas are exploding, when the country is so divided, even within religious traditions are so divided. Did you plan to put this out now, or was it?
So I proposed the book in the 2019, in what I call the before times. And I did not anticipate 2020. And then, of course, 2020 happened, and the book was almost entirely written during 2020, which is to say that it was composed in really a crucible of a global pandemic, of newfound awareness of racial injustice in our country and activism for racial justice and reaction to that, not to mention a fraught presidential election and all of the controversies around that. So certainly the last several years have been a time of difference and strife in our country, and that was the case already when I proposed it. But I proposed the book because I thought that the subject matter was worthy, no matter when it might be written. I had, as you know, previously edited a Musar Torah Commentary, which looks inward at how we might study each parsha to do the work of Tikkun HaNefesh, repair of the soul. And this is, if you will, a sequel, in that it asks us to look at each Torah portion deeply in order to think about how each parsha may inspire us to do Tikkun Olam, repair of the world.
And just a reminder that the Musar Commentary podcast is available on the website. If you just go to the Jewish Sacred Aging and click and do the search for it, you'll find it. And we use that all the time on our website, Torah Commentaries. You have this very, interesting little bit of dialogue at the very beginning on page XIX, which is always interesting, about a comment that every single rabbi that I know, especially in the last half a dozen years, have had this conversation. When the layperson walks up to them and says, "Rabbi, what from the Bima, what we want is religion. We don't want any politics." And you begin the introduction that you wrote with exactly that conversation. Talk to me about that conversation.
So the Social Justice Torah Commentary is meant as a refutation and an antidote to that critique. So first, the refutation. I would argue and do argue that I do not ever discuss politics from the Bima. What I mean by that is that I would never endorse or oppose a candidate for office from the Bema. That would endanger the congregation's 501c3 status, although we know that clergy of different movements, of different religions, do this all the time and don't suffer consequences. But we support the Johnson Amendment, which says that you can't endorse or oppose a candidate for office and retain your 501c3 tax-deductible status. So, but it isn't only because of that, but also because it would be divisive and inappropriate. And there's nothing in the Torah that says vote for or against this particular candidate. However, the Torah is at its foundation about how God wants our people in formation to establish a society, how to relate to one another, not only as individuals and not even primarily as individuals, but as a society, and in particular, how to care for those who are neediest, most disadvantaged, and most likely to lack voice in the community. And so the Torah in of itself is an intensely social justice oriented document, one that calls on us as a society, not only as individuals, to heal the sick, to heal our society, to respond to those who are in need, and to establish justice where there's injustice. So the refutation that goes throughout this book is not only the words in the introduction, which is the part that you're citing, but also in every chapter of the book, where our contributors to the Social Justice Torah Commentary have taken seriously the call, which was to look deeply into the Parsha, to look deeply into each week's portion, to examine Parshanut, which is to say Torah commentary, whether it be classical rabbinic Torah commentary or modern midrash or biblical exegesis, whatever it might be, and construct with integrity an argument based on the Torah portion, a social justice argument. And so that's the refutation of the claim. The antidote is also there. And that is to say that the congregants who make that claim and that critique are not always wrong. And here's what I mean. Sometimes people who make arguments for social justice based on Judaism do so on a very thin basis. They say, we're all created in God's image and therefore ... or justice shall you pursue ... And the Social Justice Torah Commentary takes those prescriptions, we're all created in God's image, justice, remember the stranger, all of those very seriously, and delves more deeply to say, let's look beyond the catchphrase at what Torah and subsequent Jewish text tell us that might inform a present-day social justice issue. And let's be clear. This generation of rabbis is hardly the first to take the study of Torah and turn it to action. Certainly, our predecessors did during the civil rights movement. Certainly, our predecessors did 100 years ago when they were advocating for the rights of labor. But it's not only Reform rabbis. It's not only contemporary or modern rabbis of the modern era who've done this, but the prophets did it. The prophets utilized words of Torah to speak out against social injustice in their day. So using the words of Torah to make a social justice argument is something that has always happened in Judaism from the beginning to now.
I think one of the interesting things also, and I'd like you to comment on this, is you allude to this in the book, the role of Jewish law, and that in encapsulating a particular social justice issue, and we're filled with them in the headlines now. Um, the 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 text can be used. I think you do channel like a particular instance and see how a similar text, one text, can be used to give you 180-degree different opinions. Could you just talk a little bit about that? Because you referenced the use of Tselem Elohim, and everybody does it. It's proof texting.
Well, there's a fascinating example that it makes me feel like a brilliant editor, although I did nothing really to cause this to happen. I invited, first of all, I should say that for the overwhelming majority of the portions, I simply asked a contributor to write on the portion, not to focus on a particular topic. I let them propose the topic. I sometimes would say no because it was already being covered, because it was a duplication and we didn't want over duplication of a topic in the book. But for example, I asked Rabbi Jill Jacobs to write on Parashat Bahar. She wrote about and focused her response on that portion, which is a very much about how one treats the land of Israel, to write an argument against the occupation of the West Bank, and in doing so, she cites a verse that's not in the portion that she's writing about, but elsewhere in the Torah, which says that if the inhabitants of the land don't follow God's way, the land will vomit them out. And so it's a warning in her mind that if the people of Israel do not behave in a humane way toward the Palestinians, that we risk that the land will vomit us out, that it's contrary to God's will. Now, later in the process of putting the book together, I realized that nobody had written about the social justice imperative to advocate for Israel. And so I specifically did ask Rabbi Jeremy Barris to do that. He is very active in AIPAC, and I knew that's a passion of his, and that he's a brilliant intellectual writer. And Parashat Lech Lecha happened to be available at that moment, and so that was a great portion for him on which to base his argument, in which our people is first called. Abraham and Sarah are called to the land of Israel, and he also cites that same other verse about how if people don't behave in a moral and humane way, the land will vomit them out. But Rabbi Barris, by contrast, applies that verse to the Palestinians, and that if they carry on with terrorism and the like, that the land will vomit them out. So here we have opposite, if you will, arguments made by two people who I'm sure don't completely disagree with each other about these issues, but opposite arguments made based on the same verse. And by the way, there's another article in the book based on Parshat Korach by Rabbi Ethan Baer about tolerating a variety of positions about Israel within the American Jewish context, which is a terribly important matter, where you and I have so many colleagues. I happen to be fortunate in this regard, but you and I have so many colleagues who feel that they can't talk about Israel in their synagogues because no matter what they say, they're going to anger a significant percentage of their congregants, and with really hot anger. And Rabbi Baer is arguing on the basis of Parshat Korach that we ought to consider legitimate debate about how Israel ought to behave and how how American Jews ought to articulate views in this way as an argument for the sake of heaven, for the sake of what's best for the people of Israel.
So the Torah portions, and again, these are individual Torah portions on the cycle. Individual scholars, colleagues have been you asked to write from a variety of different opinions and perspectives on each particular Torah portion. So coming up soon are two challenging Torah portions in many ways, Vayichel and Pekudei, and in one of them, we talk about this idea of gifts that are given from the heart. And this other, and Pekudei, you talk about equity. The colleague writes about equity and has this wonderful image of the breastplate, the high priest breastplate. Could you just comment on that? I mean, it's really a fascinating, first of all, image, and then interpretation.
So years ago, Rabbi Address, I gave a sermon called "The Boring Parts of the Torah," which was about Vayichel and Pekudei, and what I said, and that my point in that sermon. So the reason that Vayichel and Pekudei are quote unquote boring is because, as you know, there's a five portions at the end of the book of Exodus that are about the building of the tabernacle. And the first two, beginning with Truma, are about the gifts that are to be brought to build and all the instructions about how the tabernacle's to be built. Then we have Kitisa, which is largely about the sin of the golden calf. And then we get Vayichel and Pekudei, which are basically a recapitulation of the first two portions in which everything that was previously commanded to be done is done in almost the same words, just a different tense as those two previous portions. And my argument in that sermon that I gave a long time ago was that there is no boring Torah portion. You can make something out of each one. And Rabbis Marina Yergin and Craig Lewis did make something great out of each of these portions in very different ways. You know, in Vayichel, recapitulates the request for the offerings that's made in Truma, that everyone should bring as their heart desires. And Rabbi Marina Yergin really struggles with the dichotomy that these offerings seem to be commanded of all the Israelites. It seems to be an obligation. And we know that in Judaism, tzedakah is an obligation. It isn't just a free will, nice thing to do of the heart. But on the other hand, it says, of everyone whose heart is so moved. And so she delves into the commentary about everyone whose heart is so moved to talk about how individuals, as they direct their required tzedakah obligation, might think about how their hearts are moved specifically to give tzedakah in ways that move them and that do the most good. So it's really kind of it's a nice manual for folks who are considering their own tzedakah. That image that you talk about that Rabbi Lewis describes. So there's one piece of what Rabbi Lewis does is he reminds us of commentary about the breastplate that's pretty well known. That there's 4 rows of 3 stones, and part of the rabbinic commentary in Midrash over the years is that no stone is in the middle, that there's no central stone, so that then the 12 stones, the 4 rows of 3 stones, each one represents a different tribe, and that with no one in the middle, that signifies that no one tribe is more important than any other. Rabbi Lewis took it a step further in a way I definitely could never have predicted, which is that he talked about how each of the tribes is represented by a different precious stone. And he did some work on gemology to learn that each stone requires different kind of care to take care of it appropriately. And for that, he makes an analogy to education equity. His argument is about equity in education. And what he points out is that just as maintaining the luster of a sapphire requires different treatment from maintaining the luster of a ruby or an emerald, so too does providing equitable education require different resources from one community to another, from one child to another, depending on the needs of each child, their poverty, their illness, their diagnosis, or the surroundings of their community, their what's their household situation, whatever it is that we need to assure education equity, which may not be spending the same amount of money on every kid. Just as a diamond needs something different from a ruby.
The use of I would, let's say, creative interpretation, which is tantamount to our Jewish tradition from time immemorial, really comes true, I think, in the two Torah portions, the bane of every bar and bat mitzvah kid who happens to draw through the short straw of either Tazria or Metzora, those two Torah portions from Leviticus. But in the book, some fascinating commentaries. The Tazria issue about this analogy of facing mortality through childbirth and the use of a Nachmanidean text, but also something extremely, extremely contemporary in the Metzora. I think it's Rabbi Knight. I think it's Asher Knight who wrote. So I'm going to quote because I can't. I'm not going to remember everything. But he brings it into the COVID and how pandemics and disease divide a community. And he writes, Parashat Metzora provides an important model for discussing how we confront inequalities in society when tackling infectious diseases. That idea, again, much like the Torah portions you just channeled, talking about equity, equality, this concept of going beyond the peshat, the literalness of the text. That really is part of what you're after, is it not? In this book, the idea of allowing people to open up, the Torah blessing la asok b'divrei Torah, of really having that text speak to you. So, could you talk about a little bit that Tazria Metzora thing? It's really fascinating.
Yes, it is, and it is one of the wonders of the book that you open to Parashat Tazria, which in a way is even a worse Torah portion than Metzora. I mean, Tazria here, what we're dealing with is how many days must a person who's given birth be isolated from the community with the newborn, and it's different if it's a girl versus a boy is born, and I mean all sorts of ritual stuff that most contemporary Jews would consider irrelevant at best and more likely offensive. Maharat Rory Picker-Nice took this on. So she's an Orthodox rabbi, obviously from a progressive branch of Orthodoxy, since she's a woman who's a rabbi, and she's the director of the Community Relations Council in St. Louis. And a really important progressive voice that people will be hearing more from, I think, in the years to come. And Maharat Picker-Nice took this portion and she said, look, this is all about the importance of paying attention to the bond of the childbearer and the child, and of the danger, in fact, to both the childbearer and the child of the process of childbirth. and to look at, that there's this period of blood purification, this acknowledgement that there's bleeding involved. And we, of course, know that in a previous era, at the time of the Torah in particular, you had very, very high mortality rates, both for childbearers and for infants. So she views this as a time of being together, trying to avoid mortality and illness, and to strengthen the bond. And then she cites an offering is made at the end of that period. And she cites Nachmanides' interpretation of what that offering is for, and it is an offering to give thanks in a way for the childbearer and the infant emerging from that period whole together, and the childbearer's body being restored to her. So, as you know, the fetus is considered in Jewish law to be part of the woman's body. So her body being restored to her full is what she's giving this offering for. And Rabbi Pickernes points out that even though there's unequal periods of time of isolation, whether she's given birth to a girl or a boy, but the offering is the same for everyone. And therefore, that's a suggestion that the childbearer's life is of equal value, no matter who it is. And then she tells us that mortality rates, childbirth mortality rates in this country, in the United States of America in the 21st century, are, first of all, higher than in most industrialized countries, and particularly high among people of color, among poor people. And there's no reason based on any sort of biological differences or anything like that. It's simply a matter of how we provide medical care to people. And so she makes an argument very strongly based on the Torah and on Nachmanides' commentary that we need to provide adequate childbirth care to everybody. And so that's not all that different, really, from the argument that Rabbi Knight makes about in Parashat Metzora. To some extent, Rabbi Knight preaches against the text, or not against the text of the Torah itself, but against the common rabbinic interpretation, which is that Metzora is, which is usually mistranslated leprosy, or tzara'at, the disease is usually mistranslated leprosy. We don't really know what that skin disease was, but that tzara'at, according to the rabbis, is a punishment for slander. In other words, the people who get sick with it are at fault. And Rabbi Knight reminds us that very often, with COVID and with lots of other things, when people get ill, we blame the victim. We blame the person who's ill. And so in that instance, he preaches against the text. On the other hand, he also talks about how the rituals set up in Parashat Metzora are arranged in order to protect the community from a highly communicable disease. And so how important it is for us to look out for every member of our society as we're constructing our society at a time of highly communicable disease. And I want to emphasize that Rabbi Knight wrote this chapter before there were vaccines. But it's equally applicable today as it was in the fall of 2020 when he wrote. Because what he talks about is healthcare disparities and how the health complications, the comorbidities that increase mortality rates with COVID, how those are not equally distributed on the basis of people of color have more comorbidities. Poor people have more comorbidities, and how we need to look at this in terms of equity and equality, and in particular, by the way, people who lived in close quarters, which is disproportionately poor people or are more susceptible to transmission of the illness. So what he really talks about in the end is how a pandemic shines a light on inequities in our society.
So, before we run out of time, we're going to start to run out of time soon, and I wanted to just pick up on, because it's always interesting to see the themes of Torah and how they're related to contemporary society, how these themes continue to emerge in the study of Torah. So I'll refer you to a portion, a chapter written by a Rabbi Barry Block on Kedoshim, okay, the Holiness Code, in the annual address rankings of Torah portions, always in the top 5 Torah portions. And you talk about the poor, and you talk about the not the corners of the field, but also could be droshed around, food inequality, because the demand for food banks are exploding. So you probably know the author of this particular chapter fairly well. In a couple of minutes, talk to me about how you approached Parashat Kedoshim.
Well, there are religious leaders in our nation today who frequently preach that lowering taxes is a religious prerogative, as a religious requirement, that taxes are somehow contrary to the will of God. And Parashat Kedoshim establishes taxes specifically for the purpose of caring for the poor. It says that everyone must set aside the corner of their fields, and that belongs to those who are poor and needy. And the rabbis then say that once the corners of the field are left, or the gleanings, then those crops do not even belong to the landholder on whose property those crops are found. Those crops in the corner of the field, or the gleanings that fall during the harvest, belong to the poor, who then have the full right to come and get them. So what that is saying is that a certain proportion of our wealth or our income, crops could be regarded as income, a certain portion of our crops or our income, of our income or our wealth, doesn't belong to us. Instead, from the very beginning, God has ordained that portion belongs to those who are in need.
It's a great, and as timely as ever, Barry, as timely as ever, actually more timely today than ever before, because those of us who've talked to or help out food banks, that this is a living text. Exactly what you've written. It's alive. It's living. It's organic, and as we said at the beginning, the publication of this, the Social Justice Torah Commentary, could not come at a better time. So I thank you for this, and I thank the contributors, the scholars who contribute to this book, and congratulate you on the editing of it. And again, the Social Justice Torah Commentary that Rabbi Block edited is a CCAR Press book, and you can get it either at your local bookstore or through, again, Amazon. Barry, thank you very much. One more thing.
You can get it. Yeah, I just want to say you can get it at ccarpress.org. And when you check out, if you put justice, all in capitals, justice 20, the number 20, justice 20, you get a 20% discount. So that's at ccarpress.org. That's where I recommend you buy the book. But yes, Amazon has it too. And if you want on Kindle, that's how you get it from Amazon. Thank you so much for having me and for helping us get the word out about the wonderful work done by the contributors to the Social Justice Commentary.
Amen. And just stay safe, stay healthy, and take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you. All of you, thank you again. Thank you. Hey, babe, thanks a lot, man. To all of you, again, thank you for joining us on today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I, again, am your host, Rabbi Richard Address. You can contact me at Rabbi Address at JewishSacredAging.com. If you'd like to make a tax-free donation to further our work, go to the website, go to the donate button, and follow the prompts. And a big, again, thank you and a shout out to Steve Lubetkin, our producer, because these podcasts are recorded and produced at Lubetkin Media Studios in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. To the next time, to all of you, stay safe, everyone. Stay healthy. Toda Rabah. Shalom.